Om Tavakatamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimatatatam Bhuyananti Bhurirajana. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome everyone to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We're just finishing up a very short chapter. No, it's not so short. A very short day in this chapter. This is the Master's birthday celebration at Dakshineshwar, and it is Sunday, February 18th, 1883. We're on page 182. I stopped here because Sri Ramakrishna had just finished giving some instructions, and then it said Sri Ramakrishna began his midday meal with the devotees. It was about 1 o'clock. A devotee sang in the courtyard below, "Awake, mother, awake! How long thou hast been asleep in the lotus of the Muladhara. Fulfill thy secret function, mother. Rise to the 1,000-petaled lotus within the head, where mighty Shiva has his dwelling. Swiftly pierce the 6 lotuses and take away my grief, O essence of consciousness." Hearing the song, Sri Ramakrishna went into samadhi. His whole body became still, and his hand remained touching the plate of food. He could eat no more. After a long time, his mind came down partially to the plane of the sense world, and he said, "I want to go downstairs." Where was he? Oh, he's in Govinda Mukherjee's house. The chapter says his celebration at Dakshineshwar, but he had been to a devotee's house. He was there at that time. "I want to go downstairs." A devotee led him down very carefully. Still in an abstracted mood, he sat near the singer. The song had ended. The master said to him very humbly, "Sir, I want to hear the chanting of the mother's name again." The musician sang, "Awake, mother, awake! How long thou hast been asleep in the lotus of the Muladhara." The master again went into ecstasy. Now we get to February 25th. That was the 18th, so it's the next week. After his noon meal, the master conversed with the devotees. Ram, Kedar, Nityagopal, M, and others had arrived from Calcutta. So now we'll be in Dakshineshwar. We know all of these people by now, huh? Ramchandra was a great householder devotee. It's interesting, the web of family relationships that he was related to Swami Vivekananda. I don't know how distant it was, but they were related. This Nityagopal was also related to M, some type of nephew, and also related to Balaram Bose. I'll read a little bit about him. And then Harish, we met earlier. He was married but wanted to live like a sannyasi. Thakur let him stay there for some time. Latu, of course, was our future Swami Atmajnananda, and he wasn't related to Ram, of course. He was an orphan boy. He came with his uncle to Calcutta, and they both ended up working for Ram. So it was through Ramchandra that Latu also came to Sri Ramakrishna. And Hazara, of course, was from Thakur's area, and many of the priests from the Kali temple were all of the temples in the Dakshineshwar temple compound were either relatives or people from the nearby villages of Kamarpukur. So this Nityagopal, he was in his early 20s, and he was a very free soul. He wasn't married. Sometimes he lived on his own. Sometimes he stayed with Ram. This Ramchandra was very generous that way. Tarak, later Swami Shivananda, also stayed in his house sometimes. So it was a little bit of an open house arrangement. And this Nityagopal, I'll read a little bit. I went through this once before, I think, long back, but because it's interesting, he became well known later. He had a little bit of funny ideas. He became known as Jnanananda Avadhut. So it says he was a beloved devotee of Sri Ramakrishna. Thakur had a very high opinion of him, and he was related to Ramchandra, not Balaram, sorry, Manomohan Mitra. Manomohan Mitra, whose son-in-law was Rakal. So all of these interesting connections. Also related to Tulsi Charandatta, who later became Swami Nirmalananda. So a lot of family relationships here. Sometimes he stayed with Ramchandra. He would come with him very often to see Thakur. Sometimes he came by himself. He always remained in some type of intoxicated state. He was very simple in nature and very prone to spiritual moods and things. So Thakur, it says, seeing his spiritual stature, was very much affectionate towards him. And he used to say that he was in the state of the Paramahamsa. And the other disciples used to wonder, Thakur says he's in the state of Paramahamsa, and yet he's warning him from time to time. And then later we'll see that he said that Urbhab Alada and Ekankar Lok Noy, his attitude is a little bit different. And he doesn't belong to this place. This is the language Thakur used to use. That means he's not really part of the inner circle, that he'll never really have the same devotion to Thakur that the other direct disciples did. After Thakur passed away, and the relics, part of them at least, were kept in Kankurgachi, Yogadan, this Nityagopal, for 5 or 6 months, it said, he did daily puja of the relics at that time. And most of the time during the day, he remained immersed in meditation. Then he took the name Jnanananda Avadhut, and some temple was established, and there was another mutt in Panihati named Kaivalya Mutt, and he wrote nearly 25 books. Some of them have been translated into English, and he has a following. And I remember seeing the temple in his name with a big image of him. And I think there's some people who look upon him as an avatar also. So this is our Nityagopal. Rakal, Harish, Latu, and Hazra were living with the master. Mr. Choudhury, who had 3 or 4 university degrees, was a government officer, was also present. He had recently lost his wife and had visited the master several times for peace of mind. Master, to Ram and the other devotees. Devotees like Rakal, Narendra, and Bhavanath may be called Nitya Siddha. Now, he's not including Nityagopal here, even though he has such a high regard for him. Nitya Siddha means eternally perfect. Now, what is the distinction between the Ishvarakoti and the Nitya Siddha? Not very clear. Now, he's saying Bhavanath. Bhavanath, sometimes he would include him with all of the others. Thakur probably felt that he was destined to be one of the monastic disciples. And it seems earlier on, he used to be considered one of the 6 Ishvarakotis. Then we find when Purna comes that Bhavanath lost his slot there, and he started calling Purna, the 6th and final, that the circle was complete when Purna came. So Bhavanath also, he kind of, marriage was arranged for him, probably around the time that Thakur was going to Kashipur. And in the beginning, Thakur was very impressed with his high spiritual state. He and his wife only talk about God all night long, and he addresses her as mother, and Thakur says, even I can't do that. But gradually it seems that Bhavanath, he became more like a stranger, asked, how are you doing, sir, and leave. And then they felt, and others wondered what has happened to Bhavanath. So that was Bhavanath. But like Nityagopal, Bhavanath, both of them, Thakur had a very good impression of them and loved them both very much. So Nitya Siddha, there are two different ways of understanding this, and some of the direct disciples talk about this. One, Nitya Siddha, that they're ever perfect. So how that works, I don't know exactly, but we have to assume that they were never born as ordinary people and had to attain perfection, that somehow they just had to shake off the little veil of Maya and remember their ever perfect state. The other idea is that they attained to the state of perfection. They had God realization in this lifetime, but either they're destined for a certain mission or they had some desire to help others. So somehow they withheld that merging in Brahman, that condition, and came to be born again. Those who are Ishvarakotis would be the same for them, except perhaps the distinction would be they would only come when the avatar comes. Otherwise, there's a big overlap. All the Ishvarakotis were Nitya Siddhas. Whether all Nitya Siddhas or Ishvarakotis, I don't know. Thakur is not one to give a whole lot of detail about all of these things. In fact, we don't really know too much. Ishvarakoti, Jivakoti, whether it's Sankhya terminology, I don't know myself exactly where it comes from. I've looked it up in dictionaries and things and haven't found it there. So Nitya Siddha, their spiritual consciousness has been awake since their very birth. Now this is another curious thing. It's awake, but it's not fully awake. Even in the case of Sri Ramakrishna, he had to, as I say, shake off the dust of Maya. That it was very easy for him, of course, but we were reading, where were we reading? One of the books was Swami Atmajnanananda, saying, oh, even in the case of Sri Ramakrishna, gradually he came to realize his spiritual stature and his role and his mission in life and everything. It wasn't exactly clear to him. It came into sharper focus when the Brahmani came and they held that convention with all of the great pundits and everything. So their spiritual consciousness has been awake since their very birth on a certain level. But they also had to practice intense spiritual disciplines and sadhana and everything. They assume human bodies only to impart spiritual illumination to others. This will be the distinctive feature. They're not born out of karma, that they had desires and they still have to complete their journey and reach the goal of life. They've already done that. But they had a different mission and different purpose for taking birth again. There's another class of devotees known as Kripa Siddha. That is to say, those on whom the grace of God descends all of a sudden. Now, Thakur uses different terminology in other places. He says Hatat Siddha. Hatat, all at once. Now, we can say everyone is Kripa Siddha, that without the grace of God, without the grace of the mind, without the grace of the Guru, that we won't get this type of illumination. But here he's saying that it really means kind of like all at once. And we sometimes hear Thakur says things like, they're all jackals howl alike, that there's somehow some uniformity with regard to samadhi and God realization. There may be, but the paths to get there are different, and the ways and everything. Thakur even talks about Swapna Siddha in one place, that one attains realization in dream. And so here he's saying, Kripa Siddha, this will be like this hotat. All at once, it descends. This is part of the Japanese Zen tradition with Satori. For them, maybe because of their Zen practice, maybe for cultural reasons, but this seemed to be the way it happened with them, that all of a sudden, without warning almost, they would have some breakthrough like that. Very often it could be a simple thing. Chopping wood and it splits in two parts, and they can have some satori, not exactly samadhi, some enlightenment experience. So it could happen at any time. Thakur talks about sadhana siddhi, those who through long practice, long years of meditation and everything, gradually they'll attain to that state of perfection. So this is they're the Nitya Siddhas. They're already perfect. So they only have to realize that, have some awakening of their ever perfect self. And then the other class, that they're not born perfect. Of course, we're all perfect. It doesn't mean that the Atman doesn't have to undergo any transformation. We have to remove that veil which is preventing us from seeing our ever perfect nature. But this is a little bit different. So they're born with karma, and through some type of spiritual practice or just some type of grace, it'll get burned up immediately. They'll have some realization. Thakur talks about this idea that a room that's been dark for 1,000 years and you flip the light switch, he says, does it become light little by little or all at once? Or a big heap of cotton, you put a match to it and just like that, or a dry straw, just like that, it'll go up. So that'll be Kripa Siddha. Those on whom the grace of God descends all of a sudden and who at once attains his vision and knowledge. Such people, here it is, may be likened to a room that has been dark 1,000 years, which when a lamp is brought into it becomes light immediately, not little by little. Yeah, I guess they didn't have light switches back then, huh? They didn't have electric lights. Those who lead a householder's life should practice spiritual discipline. They should pray eagerly to God in solitude. Okay, householder's life, that means also those who lead a householder's life. Everyone needs to practice some spiritual discipline. Pray to God eagerly in solitude. Thakur recommended going into solitude. He recommended prayer, and he recommended that we do it with some urgency, with some intensity, some real longing. This is Bakulata to Mr. Choudhury. God cannot be realized through scholarship. Now he's saying this to him because this is a man, we can imagine what he thinks of scholarship if he had 3 or 4 university degrees. No one will go through all of that. It's not to get a better job. He was a government officer, but he must have had some real attachment to scholarly study and everything. So Thakur is telling him, God cannot be realized through scholarship, who indeed can understand the things of the Spirit through reason. No, all should strive for devotion to the lotus feet of God. We see among his disciples those who didn't develop that quality to analyze everything, had a little bit of an easier time developing devotion. Latu Maharaj, of course, he's the prime example. How much Shraddha and how much faith he had, and whatever Thakur said to him, how that was just unquestionably the best thing for him, is just remarkable. Swami Premananda, we spoke about him last week a little bit, how he wasn't much interested in his studies or anything, and yet how much love and devotion he had. He didn't care too much to analyze everything. This is a kind of a disease with a lot of us, myself included, that we overanalyze things a little bit. Of course, it's important in the beginning to develop conviction and to make sure we don't swallow something whole without knowing what we're swallowing. Who indeed can understand the things of the Spirit through reason. No, all should strive for devotion to the lotus feet of God. Infinite are the glories of God. How little can you fathom then? Can you ever find out the meaning of God's ways? This is very important for us because this tendency is there to want to get answers for every question that we have. Especially, why is the world the way it is? Why does God allow this to happen? Why do good people suffer? We have so many questions like that. And we assume that there must be a good answer. But there's no good answer. There are plenty of answers. There was a book that was written by Rabbi Kushner, I think was his name, that why do good people suffer, something like that. And he gives, I didn't read it, I just know about it. He gives something like 6 or 7 alternative answers to the question. That means that we decide ourselves which one we like. There's no one final conclusive answer, that God is testing us, that He wants us to get rid of some of our, burn off some of our karma, or God has nothing to do with it, that these things happen in the world. So many different ways we can understand it, that finally we have to just say that who can understand these things fully? That some things we just accept, and we don't bother too much about it, and it becomes not just irrelevant, but it becomes, it sidetracks us a little bit from the spiritual goal. So Thakur was always warning his disciples that this mind is like a small container, and you're trying to pour a large amount of milk into it. It won't be able to hold it. It'll just overflow. So stop doing that. Bhishma was none other than one of the 8 Vasus, but even he shed tears on his bed of arrows. He said, how astonishing. God himself is the companion of the Pandava brothers. That means in the form of Krishna. And still there is no end to their troubles and sorrows. Who can ever understand the ways of God? A man thinks, I've practiced a little prayer and austerity, so I've gained a victory over others. But victory and defeat lie with God. I have seen a prostitute dying in the Ganges and retaining consciousness to the end. This is supposed to be a very high type of birth, to pass away in full consciousness. We all think that, how nice to die in our sleep. We won't suffer, we won't know anything. But in the Vedantic tradition, to pass away in full consciousness means that it's just like being aware of that transition from dreaming to waking. When we're fully awake and we can immediately see, that was all a dream. And if we're in full consciousness, then the belief is that full consciousness remains even during that transition period. So it's considered a very high type of birth. So Thakur is saying that from our ordinary way of calculating things, if someone has led a loose life like that, they shouldn't be qualified for that. It should be for someone who's led a very pure type of life and done a lot of spiritual practice. But how do we account for it? We can come up with our own theories, past lifetime, a lot of karma, all these things. But ultimately, what Thakur is saying is, it's a big question mark. We can't say for certain. So we shouldn't try to get hard and fast answers for all of these types of questions. Mr. Choudhury, how can one see God? Now remember, he's in this state of bereavement. He recently lost his wife, and he is very receptive to this idea that, no, I know through all of my university degrees and everything, that won't be of much help to me, but please give me some practical advice. How can one see God? Master, not with these eyes. God gives one divine eyes. Divya Chakshuhu, we read in chapter 11 of the Gita, that when Arjuna asked Sri Krishna for a vision of his universal form, and he says, you won't be able to see me with those eyes, I'll give you some special eyes. No, it's not really specialized. It means that mind has to go up to a different level in order to have this type of experience. Only then can one behold him. God gave Arjuna, again it means Krishna, divine eyes so that he might see his universal form. Your philosophy is mere speculation. Now, I don't know why he says your philosophy. Maybe he was a member of the Brahmo Samaj, or maybe he studied philosophy, one of his university degrees, but it means philosophy in general. It only reasons. God cannot be realized that way. God cannot remain unmoved if you have raga bhakti, that is love of God with passionate attachment to Him. We know this is one of Thakur's pet theories, that devotion can be divided into two types. One will be, Kumar? Vaidhi bhakti, good, thank you. And the other will be raga bhakti. So the first one is where we have to do very regular spiritual practice. We get teachings, instructions from the Guru. We have to repeat the mantra a certain number of times. We should get up at a certain time. We should do a certain amount of puja, some spiritual reading, all of that. A little bit routine, but necessary. And the raga bhakti is something that just spontaneously comes. It comes as the result of regular steady practice, but also some grace has to come. And when that comes, then realization of God is assured to us. It's only a question of time, a short amount of time. Otherwise, before that, we have no idea. It can be lifetime after lifetime. When we really attain the state of raga bhakti, Thakur says, if you see waiting all night long, we have no way of knowing how long it'll be. If, say, we do vigil at night, we don't know how long we have to wait. There's no clock, there's nothing till the sun rises. We think, my God, it's taking forever. But we see a little pink in the horizon, and we say, now we know for sure that within 15, 20 minutes, half hour, the sun will rise. So this is that raga bhakti. Do you know how fond God is of His devotees' love? It is like the cow's fondness for fodder mixed with oiled cake. The cow gobbles it down greedily. Yeah, they do that sometimes, add some gur and other things to it. And Swami Shivananda, Mahapurush Maharaj, he used to like to take this to the cows and feed them with it. They're very, very fond of it. Raga bhakti is pure love of God, a love that seeks God alone and not any worldly end. This Shuddha bhakti, Thakur talks about this pure devotion. Sometimes it seems to be in the sense that we don't care for the path of knowledge or anything, that it's just devotion. Other times it stresses this other idea, because he doesn't mind, he likes this idea that we should combine knowledge and devotion. But this Shuddha bhakti, sometimes he equates that with what he calls ahetuki bhakti. That means the devotion that has no motive to it. We don't pray to God to get anything. We pray only for love and devotion. This is that motiveless devotion that we can say is pure devotion. So a love that seeks God alone and not any worldly end. Prahlad had it. Suppose you go to a wealthy man every day, but you seek no favor of him. You simply love to see him. If he wants to show you favor, you say, "No, sir, I don't need anything. I came just to see you." Such is love of God for its own sake. You simply love God and don't want anything from Him in return. You remember there was a period when Narendra came to Sri Ramakrishna, and Sri Ramakrishna absolutely ignored him. Now, other times, seeing him, he would go into ecstasy. And if he didn't see him for a few days, he would weep. And he would say, "Oh, go and find out why Narendra's not coming." Sometimes he would go to see him, even. But this time, for a period of, I don't know how long, a few weeks, Narendra would come and he would look the other way. He wouldn't say anything to him. He wouldn't even recognize him, his presence in the room. Then after that whole period, he said to him, "Why do you keep coming? I don't even look at you. I don't even talk to you." And he says, "I come because I love to see you. I don't require you to say anything to me or anything like that." This is that type of bhakti. He says, "No, sir, I don't need anything. I just came to see you." Such is love of God for its own sake. You simply love God and don't want anything from Him in return. Saying this, the Master sang, This is a song that he repeats many, many times. Though I am never loath to grant salvation. This is supposed to be Sri Krishna speaking. I hesitate indeed to grant pure love. Whoever wins pure love surpasses all. He is adored by men. He triumphs over the three worlds. This is an idea that's very prevalent in the Vaishnava scriptures, especially from the Chaitanya school, but others also, that mukti is not considered by them to be the highest goal of life. We have 4 purusharthas: dharma, artha, kama, moksha. And they add a 5th. There's a panchama purushartha, prema, this love of God. And they say this is much higher. And even with the different types of mukti or moksha that they believe in, that the one where one merges in God is the lowest. The one where one has the same qualities of God, a little bit better. But the one where one is just in the presence of God, they like that the best. To have some sense of feeling of separation. That'll be higher than what is normally considered mukti, where one is simply not born again and one merges in the absolute. There's no sense of distinction. They like a little sense of distinction because they want to be able to experience the joy, the taste of devotion. So Sri Krishna says, yeah, the idle mind, somebody wants mukti, you don't want to be born again, okay. But somebody says, I only want to love you. He'll say, okay, that's a rare thing. You have to work for that. That will require really some grace. It'll require complete lack of any selfishness. Don't ask me for anything if you really want that. You only want pure love, then I can give you that. He continued, the gist of the whole thing is that one must develop passionate yearning for God. This is our famous Vakulata, and practice discrimination and renunciation. So he's adding 2 things in addition to that. Vakulata is enough, but we won't be able to have that passionate yearning for God without discrimination. Discrimination tells us that, yes, these things of the world won't satisfy me. We have to have that understanding and renunciation. So we have to understand that this world is not anything that I should look upon as the beginning and end of life for me. That there has to be something higher. This can't satisfy me. So that will lead to this feeling of dispassion, vairagya. Then, okay, then I won't seek these things. In fact, I'll look upon them as obstacles. Vishavat, they've used this term even. It'll be like poison to me because I know it entangles me in the world. So these go together. This is very interesting how these 3 that look so different are so intimately connected. Passionate yearning for God, practicing discrimination. What is real, what is unreal, what is of value, what's of not, what is substantial, what is insubstantial, and renunciation. Okay, it's not real, it's not substantial, it can't do anything to lead me to the highest goal, then I give it up. So these things are very closely related. Mr. Choudhury, sir, is it not possible to have the vision of God without the help of a guru? Now, Thakur often skirts this question. Why does he do it? Partly because he didn't like to think of himself as a guru. Not so, and he'll say, I'll just read the first line. He says, Satchidananda himself is the guru. Now, is he really saying to him that you don't need a human guru? That God alone is the real guru? I don't think so. Because he will emphasize the role of the guru. He himself took so many different gurus. He himself had disciples, even though he said, I have no disciples. Because he didn't have that abhiman. He didn't have that feeling of pride and that he didn't look upon himself that way. He used to say, Guru, Baba, Karta. These 3 terms, Guru, Baba is a term of respect that's used in some tradition, Vaishnava tradition, and Karta is master. that they'll use for some these zamindars and other things, or even the karta can also be a term for guru like that. He didn't like. He said, "I feel like I'm being stung by these poisonous fish. They can sting you with a terrible pain. Whenever anybody addresses me, Guru, Baba, or Karta." Of course, Mathur Babu always called him Baba, and he didn't seem to mind so much because of that relationship. So Satchidananda himself is the Guru. What I think he's really saying is, don't look upon the Guru as a human being. Try to feel the divine presence within, and understand that it's not the human aspect, it's that divine aspect within the Guru that is the essential aspect. At the end of the Shava Sadhana, Thakur talks about it in other places, part of a tantric ritual where one actually sits on a corpse and propitiates the Divine Mother. The idea behind a lot of these tantric rituals is to go beyond this idea of pure and impure. The things that people consider wretched and horrible to touch is also just a combination of the elements or the three gunas. So to get rid of that, they do that type of sadhana. So at the end of the Shava Sadhana, just when the vision of the Ishta, the chosen deity, chosen ideal, is about to take place, the Guru appears before the aspirant. So Guru appears. So this will be in human form, or at least the vision of the human form of the Guru, and says to him, "Behold, there's your Ishta." Saying this, the Guru merges in the Ishta. He who is the Guru is also the Ishta. So we should look upon the Guru as a type of manifestation of that same form of God that we worship. In the case of, particularly in our order, we look upon the Guru as not exactly a manifestation of Sri Ramakrishna, but that it's his power that's working through all of the Gurus of our order. The Guru is the thread that leads to God. Women perform a ritualistic worship known as the Ananta Vrata, the object of worship being the infinite, Ananta, but actually the deity worshipped is Vishnu. In him are the infinite forms of God, to Ram and other devotees. If you asked me which form of God you should meditate upon, I should say, fix your attention on that form which appeals to you most, but know for certain that all forms are all forms of one God alone. This is the whole concept of Ishta Devata. Even the term is a very curious term if we look at it from the point of other spiritual traditions, that is the God that appeals to you, that you've chosen, that you like to worship. Now, somebody will say, well, it's got to be one or the other. But the idea is that the same infinite reality, which is beyond name and form, can be worshipped with any name and form, any of the traditional ways that it's done, and that each one will represent a particular spiritual attitude, and each of these different attitudes will appeal to a different class of devotee. You find the one that works for you, that appeals to you. It may be through your family tradition. It may just be because of your understanding, whether you're more dualistic or non-dualistic, or do you have some special devotion to your own mother that makes it very appropriate to worship God as mother? Do you have a strong maternal instinct that you're drawn to infants, to small children, that you love to hold them and play with them? Then it'll be very appropriate to worship God as a child. So this is that idea that each one is equally appropriate. It depends on the individual. Each one is equally capable of taking one to the highest type of realization. Never harbor malice toward anyone. Shiva, Kali, and Hari are but different forms of that one. He is blessed indeed who has known all as one. This is something that is commonly understood in India and many other traditions, but is not always followed. And we find that there are certain devotees of certain sects, certain followers of Shiva, who would not be caught dead in a temple to Vishnu, and vice versa. That Thakur talks about the devotee who was lighting incense in a place, and he wanted it only go to Shiva and not to Vishnu. He was blowing it with his hand so it wouldn't go. So we find religious fanaticism everywhere, even though deep down that understanding is there, that God can be manifest in any way. So this is why Thakur was so liberal, partly because of this understanding, partly because he actually practiced all of these. He worshipped God in all of these different forms. Shiva, we don't find that any Shaiva teacher came to Sri Ramakrishna, or that he practiced any specific Shiva sadhana. But when he was a young boy, the night of Ishvarakotis, and dressed up as Shiva, he so merged in Shiva and felt oneness with Shiva that we can say he already had that realization. And in another sense, Shiva represents the Soham, Shivoham attitude. So his Vedanta sadhana also, on one level, can be understood as part of this, taking the attitude of worshiping God as Shiva. Then he sings a song. Outwardly he appears as Shiva's devotee, but in his heart he worships Kali, the blissful mother, and with his tongue he chants aloud, Lord Hari's name. Now, there's another subtle distinction between this understanding that God can be worshipped in all forms, and all names are all names of God, all forms are all forms of God, and the second idea of Nishtha, Ishta Nishtha, that we may understand that, but there's one that appeals to us, and we've decided to follow that path, so we stick to that, and we don't jump from one to the other. We can go and visit, in India, we can go to any temple and bow down. We can walk into any church and feel the divine presence. We can go into a mosque and feel the infinite absolute there. We can do all of these things, but we'll have some special devotion, and we'll follow the special methods of worship of the tradition that we follow, and of the particular form of God that we worship. So there has to be the steadfast devotion to our own spiritual path. And Thakur says, because of that, we can feel some connectedness with those who worship all other paths. He gives a nice illustration that the daughter-in-law, when she moves into her husband's house after marriage, that automatically she's connected to all of them. They become her family, extended family. And she serves them with love and affection and devotion and everything. But she has a special relationship with her husband, and it's only because of her husband that she feels this connectedness with everyone else. So the husband represents this nishtha, her own spiritual path. The body does not endure without a trace of lust, anger, and the like. You should try to reduce them to a minimum. This is another great belief that Thakur had. Even the incarnation, even the avatar, he used to say that pure gold is a useless thing. It has to have a little bit of an alloy to it. Otherwise it's too soft. It's too pure. It can't serve any purpose in the world. A little bit of an alloy that will allow it to be useful in the world. So even the avatar has to be born with a little bit of rajas in order to accomplish things. Tamas, I'm not so sure about, but at least a little trace of maya there, a little bit of attraction to things, and even a little bit of attachment. Thakur, how he was attached to his own disciples, and how his heart would yearn for them. Holy Mother, how she would weep when any of the direct disciples passed away. So a little bit of maya will be there, but it doesn't bind them. That's the difference. So he says that, that's natural. You look at yourself, you'll see that you have a little bit of lust and anger and greed and pride. It's natural, don't feel too bad about it, but try to reduce it to a minimum. Looking at Kedar, the master said, he is very nice. He accepts both the absolute and the relative. He believes in Brahman, but he also accepts the gods and divine incarnations in human form. The Kedarnath, he was from a place called Halishohar. I went there once, a very nice place. This is the birthplace of Ramprasad. And his house is there, and the little shrine is still there. It's a very nice place to visit. He and Vijay Krishna Goswami were good friends because Vijay lived in the Dhaka, Narayanganj area, and Kedar worked there. He had to go there for his work. And they were both devotees of Sri Ramakrishna. Kedar also belonged a little bit attached to some of these kind of odd sects, this Kardavaja sect and others with some funny practices. So Thakur praised him very much. At one time he said, "Get away from me." Kedar said, "What does the master say?" So we don't know what was in his mind all of the time, this is Kedar. But still, Thakur praised him. Looking at Kedar, the master said, he is very nice. He accepts both the absolute and the relative. He believes in Brahman, but he also accepts the gods and divine incarnations in human form. Then it says, in Kedar's opinion, Sri Ramakrishna was such an incarnation. So he and Vijay Krishna Goswami and Ramchandra Datta and Girish Ghosh, these were some of the ones who had the firmest belief that Thakur was a divine incarnation. Vijay Krishna Goswami, partly because of some visions he had in Dhaka, it comes later that he says to Sri Ramakrishna, "Now I know who you are." And he said, "I saw you, you came to me," something like that. And then he said to the others, in some places you'll find 1 annas, 2 annas. Here is the only place where you'll find the full 100%. This divine manifestation of God. So Kedar and Vijay, both of them, looked upon Thakur that way. Ram, of course, and Girish. They not only fanatically believed it, but they wanted everybody else to believe it. Looking at Nityagopal, the master said to the devotees, he is in a lofty mood. He was a little simple, the Nityagopal also, and didn't speak very much, and would answer questions like a small child. I think some of the others thought maybe he was feigning it sometimes even. I don't know. None of the other direct disciples seemed to be as impressed with Nityagopal as Sri Ramakrishna was. To Nityagopal, don't go there too often. You may go once in a while. She may be a devotee, but she is a woman too. Therefore, I warn you. We'll get this later. It comes up in a couple of pages, but in case we don't get there, what he's referring to is the Nityagopal. He was about 23 or 24 years old at the time, and he probably also went to one of these other groups. Some of these Vaishnava groups, there were two things. One is sometimes they would practice this Madhura Bhava, where one looks upon oneself as a lover and God is the beloved. And in order to practice that, one man and one woman man would have his female companion, and they would look upon themselves as Krishna and Radha. And a very dangerous type of thing. So Thakur warned against that because unless they were very, very pure in heart, sometimes it led to other things. The other thing is this Vatsalya Bhava. Now this woman devotee, because Nityagopal was so simple and childlike, she looked upon him as a child and liked to worship him, thinking this is the baby Gopala, even to have him sit on her lap and things like that. So Thakur warned him very much that she may be very pure in heart and everything, but one thing may lead to another. Be very, very careful. So, Sadhu Shabdan, he used to say. Oh, holy man, beware. She may be a devotee, but she is a woman too. Therefore, I warn you. Then Thakur continues, the sannyasi must observe very strict discipline. He must not look even at the picture of a woman. This seems to indicate that Thakur knew either he wanted him to become a sannyasi or he knew that he would. And apparently he did remain unmarried. He called himself an avatut throughout his life. So a sannyasi must observe very strict discipline. He must not look even at the picture of a woman. But this rule doesn't apply to householders. Remember, this is partly for this Mr. Choudhury also. And who else was there? Kedar was there. He was also married. An aspirant should not associate with woman even though she is very much devoted to God. A sannyasi, even though he may have subdued his passions, should follow this discipline to set an example to householders. Worldly people learn renunciation by seeing the complete renunciation of a monk. Otherwise, they sink more and more. A sannyasi is a world teacher. I remember a statement that Swami Swananji made one time. It was in the context of one of the monks in Trabuco. He used to like to meditate in his room. And he used to say, yeah, Thakur said when one meditates, one should not let anybody else know about it. He should be inside of the mosquito curtain and everything. And then Swami Swananji said, no, that a sannyasi's life is a public life. That it's not just for your own good that you do your spiritual practices, but you have to set an example for others. Unless other people can see it, then they won't benefit from it, they won't learn from it, they may even have doubts. Yes, he says he's meditating in his room, he may be sleeping. So he emphasized this idea also. Sannyasi is a world teacher. That doesn't mean having the pride that we're here to teach everybody, but we know that people will judge Thakur and the order and everything by looking at us, so we have to try to maintain some standard that way. Okay, that's the end of that day. The next is Friday, March 9th, 1883. About 9 o'clock in the morning, the master was seated in his room with Rakal M and a few other devotees. M was probably staying there at that time, and Harish. Yeah, we saw before. It was the day of the new moon. As usual with him on such days, Sri Ramakrishna entered again and again into communion with the Divine Mother. So this happened on the day of the new moon. It would happen because something with this intense darkness at night would bring this idea of the Divine Mother into his mind. It would happen when the sun went down every day. So almost anything would put him into that mood, but especially in these days. He said to the devotees, God alone exists and all else is unreal. The Divine Mother has kept all deluded by her Maya. Look at men. Most of them are entangled in worldliness. They suffer so much, but still they have the same attachment to lust and gold. The camel eats thorny shrubs and blood gushes from its mouth. Still it will eat thorns. While suffering pain at the time of delivery, a woman says, I shall never go to my husband again. But afterwards she forgets. The truth is that no one seeks God. There are people who eat the prickly leaves of the pineapple and not the fruit. Now, he doesn't mean literally no one seeks God. He's saying that there are very few people in this world, and it's through God's grace. Even Shankaracharya says that through the grace of God we take this human birth. Through the grace of God we'll meet someone who can be our spiritual guide, and through the grace of God we have this longing for liberation. Otherwise we try to find all the joy and pleasure and satisfaction in the world, and it's not that there isn't any. We can have a good career, we can have a good family, all these things, and we get contentment from that. But the ultimate joy and the ultimate contentment and goal of life will be found in God realization. And this is something that very few realize. It's either through the grace of God or very good karma, or through intense suffering in the world. This also can bring that about. Devotee. Sir, why has God put us in the world? Now we don't know who this devotee is. It's possible that it's M himself. Sometimes if it just says a devotee, either M doesn't know who it is or it means himself. Sir, why has God put us in the world? Master, the world is the field of action, karma bhumi. The field of action, karma bhumi, has a slightly different meaning also. This is where we come to burn off our old karma and create good karma, and where we're able to attain the God realization, which we can't do in any other sphere or through any other vehicle. It has to be a human body in this human lifetime. So the world is the field of action. Through action one acquires knowledge. The Guru instructs the disciple to perform certain works and refrain from others. Again, he advises the pupil to perform action without desiring the result. The impurity of the mind is destroyed through the performance of duty. One of the few times that Thakur really emphasizes what we call karma yoga. Usually he'll emphasize prayer and meditation and holy company and everything. Now he's talking about this performance of action, doing our duty without desiring the results. The great theme of the Gita, of course, and Swamiji's Karma Yoga. The impurity of the mind is destroyed through the performance of duty. This is how we get rid of our karma rather than create more karma. If any action that we do that's not done in a motiveless way, anything that's done in a selfish way or with some desire for the fruits or with the feeling of pride that I've done it, it creates more karma. Anything that's done as an offering or with this feeling of that I'm just doing this out of a sense of duty, that this should be done, kartavya, then our karma gets cleansed, it gets washed away, it gets exhausted. They talk about the exhaustion of karma. The impurity of the mind is destroyed through the performance of duty. It is like getting rid of a disease by means of medicine under the instruction of a competent physician. So again, there are many, many ways this can be answered. Why has God put us in the world? So Thakur is giving this one answer. He might simply say that who knows the ways of God, why does it happen? But here he's saying, look at it this way, that this is an opportunity. If we were in a different realm where there's only enjoyment, no one would seek God and no one would get out of that bondage. This is our chance. That we're born in this world because here we can burn off our karma, we can change our samskaras, we can do spiritual discipline, we can have God realization. We should look at it as a great thing, this human birth, as a wonderful and blessed opportunity to have some higher realization, so we shouldn't waste it. Why doesn't God free us from the world? He will free us when the disease is cured. So we have to get rid of all this old karma, we have to get rid of this false conception of ourselves, we have to get rid of selfishness, all of these other things. That's the disease that we suffer from. He will liberate us from the world when we were through with the enjoyment of lust and gold. Once a man registers his name in the hospital, he cannot run away. The doctor will not let him go away unless his illness is completely cured. Okay, this is a good place to stop. And now he'll start talking about Rakal, later Swami Ramananda, and this feeling of motherly affection. When Sri Ramakrishna was in the presence of Rakal, he himself felt like Mother Yashoda. And that was that beautiful relationship that they had. So we'll stop here and have our closing prayer. Om Niranjanam Nityamananda Rupam Bhaktanukham Bhatudha Vikraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamedhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you, everyone. Everyone stay well and have a good week.